It is my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for today. In previous symposiums, we have showed a little clip of some of his writing and his videos. But our speaker today is Dr. Doug Tallamy, and he's the T.A. Baker Professor of Agriculture and Natural Resources in the Department of Entomology and Wildlife Ecology at the University of Delaware, where he's authored 106 research publications and has taught insect-related courses for 41 years. He started when he was in kindergarten. Chief among his research goals is to better understand the many ways insects interact with plants and how such interactions determine the diversity of animal communities. His book, Bringing Nature Home, was published by Timber Press in 2007, and that was the start of the movement. This book was an award-winning book, and he got all kinds of disciples after that book, after the publication of that book. He went on to do The Living Landscape, co-authored that with Rick Dark. That was 2014. Nature's Best Hope, a New York Times bestseller. That was in February 2020. And his most recent book is The Nature of Oaks, released in March 2021. He has another book that'll be coming out in April. We don't have it yet. He can tell you more about that. He's gotten awards and recognition from Garden Writers Association, Audubon, National Wildlife Federation, Western Carolina University, Garden Club of America, American Horticulture Association. And as far as his educational qualifications, he has a BS in biology from Allegheny College, MS in entomology from Rutgers, a PhD in entomology from the University of Maryland. He comes to us from Pennsylvania, where he lives with his wife, Cindy, on restored property. Please welcome Doug Tallamy.
Thank you, Nancy. Can you hear me? Can I? Good. Yeah, thanks, Nancy. Thanks for braving the weather. We're all here. I don't know if we're going to get home, but we're here. You know, it has not been a good week for environmental news, but it's been a good week for personal news, and I will share it with you. I have ordered my hearing aid. I still can't hear you today, but February 16th, I will be able to hear you. And I have an appointment to get my missing tooth, so I don't look like a pirate anymore. But that's in March. So, all right, that's my news. Let's talk about Chickadee's Guide to Gardening. What we're talking about is what the native plants you put in your properties are going to do ecologically, particularly for birds, but for everything else as well. But before we do that, let's talk about my grandchildren. They live in, some of them live in Portland, Oregon, and we go to visit them. Of course, Portland is very proud of how green they are. They would claim they're the greenest city in the country. They have a big park called Forest Park. Everybody rides a bike. Everybody's environmentally conscious. But when I go to visit the grandchildren and I look at the street trees in Portland, oh, what are we going to do? Portland. So every time I went there, I said, hey, these trees are not from the Pacific Northwest. And one of these years, I'm going to measure that. They've got trees from Asia, a lot of calla repair, a lot of zelkova, a lot of ginkgos. They've got trees from Europe, a lot of Norway maple, a lot of little leaf linden, a lot of horse chestnut. They have a lot of trees from the East, which in the West are not native. A lot of sycamores, red oaks, sweet gums. So when my oldest granddaughter got to be age 8, I said, that's old enough. And I gave her a clipboard and we walked around Portland and I called out the names of the trees and she wrote them down. And then afterwards I had to decipher what she wrote. We looked at a lot of trees. We looked at 1,176 trees. 100 of them were indigenous to the Pacific Northwest, but 1,076 were not. So almost 92% of the trees in the greenest city of the country are non-native trees. And if I wanted to design a city that was unable to support local wildlife, that's exactly what I would do. I would make it all non-native plants. But they do have birds that breed in Portland. They've got scrub jays and they've got crows. because those two, they're corvids. They're very good at essentially living off human garbage. They have a pretty good population of robins. A lot of the non-native trees they have actually make berries, and the robins use those in the fall, but they breed on the earthworms in the lawns. But there are a whole bunch of birds that are not breeding in Portland, right outside of Portland, but not in Portland because of the way they've landscaped. There are no spotted towhees, white-breasted nuthatches, red-breasted nuthatches. You know, with this missing tooth, I can't talk, but March. Song sparrows, black-headed grosbeaks, downy woodpeckers, hairy woodpeckers, pileated woodpeckers, Lewis's woodpeckers. All these guys could be breeding in Portland, but they're not. Red-breasted sapsuckers, ruby-crowned kinglets, golden-crowned kinglets, western bluebirds, varied thrushes, western tanagers, black-throated gray warblers, brown creepers, bush tits, black-capped chickadee, chestnut-backed chickadee, Buick's wrens, juncos. They all could be breeding there, but they're not. So much of Portland, our greenest city, is a biological desert. And it's not because it's a city. It's because of the plants we chose to put in that city. And you know, my stepsons live there and they say, oh, Doug's picking on Portland again. I could go to any city in this country and tell pretty much the same story. So it's not that Portland's particularly bad. We've got 135 million acres of residential landscape in this country. And most of it is just like Portland. It doesn't need to be an ecological disaster. We can learn to share our properties. Now, it's easier to share your property when it's not 100% cement, which in a lot of cities it is. But as you move into the suburbs, we have a lot of opportunities there. And that's basically what we're going to talk about today. How do we share our properties with other living things? I am going to focus on birds because if we landscape for birds, we have landscaped successfully for a lot of other things. Birds are now our charismatic megafauna, believe it or not, but they require healthy environments to be able to breed. So I'm going to talk about the Carolina chickadee because we've got a lot of data on Carolina chickadees. But much of what I say today is going to represent almost all the birds that are out there. What we're going to do is go through the life cycle of a Carolina chickadee as it could happen in your yard. Now, they are tree hole nesters. And they seek out those tree holes and start to build a nest in the spring. But finding a hole is a challenge. That one, for example, is too big. If they were to nest in that hole, raccoons would reach in and that'd be the end of them. So they have to find a hole of a particular size. That's good. That's a good one. Yeah. But it's also good for titmice, which are bigger. They will push them out. So the chickadee is going to lose out on that one. How about this? That's a little bit bigger, smaller, so that the titmice can't get in there. Yes, we're going to use this hole. 85 species of North American birds are cavity nesters, and we don't have enough cavities for them. So if you have the opportunity to leave a dead tree up, ignore your arborist who says you have to take it down. No, you don't. You only have to take it down if it's going to fall on somebody's head or your house. But there's a lot of situations where that's not the case. And in Texas, this is what they're doing with those tall loblollies that were isolated when they built suburbia all around them. They're cutting them off about 15 feet off. They're no longer a hazard and just leaving them that way. And within a year, the brown-headed nuthatches carve out little holes and they're breeding in those things. You can share your property with snags if you try a little bit. All right, now we have a hole. We have to build our nest. Chickadees really like to make their nests out of horsehair. So if you tie a horse up in your front yard, they will pull the hairs out of the tail and make their nest. If you don't have a horse, try cat hair. How many people have cats? Brush your cat and put the hair out on the back porch. Put the hair on the back porch, not the cat. 2 to 3 billion birds killed by cats in North America every year. Peter Morrow wrote a book called Cat Wars, and he gets death threats. Cat lovers, they're serious people. But if you can keep your cat indoors, even though you don't see the things they're killing, they're killing them all the time. Okay, we got the cat hair on the back. It's fun to watch the chickadee come. Now you want to keep it dry. If it's going to rain, pull the cat hair in, but keep it dry, and they'll come and they tug and they pull. What they're trying to do is make a nice little ball that they can carry back to the nest. There, that's one. If you don't have a cat, you can go to Wild Birds Unlimited and buy a hairball. They sell them just for that. All right, you have now built your nest. You've lined it with whatever hair you have. You've laid your eggs. And that's a very productive nest. 6 eggs. That's a lot for a chicken. Now those eggs are going to hatch, and you have to feed your babies. Now, of course, we know our chickadees when they come to our feeders eating seeds, and we tend to think that's all chickadees need is seed. Well, 50% of their diet, even in the wintertime, is seeds. The other 50%, even in the wintertime, is insects and spiders. And when it comes time to reproduce, their babies can't eat seeds at all. So putting out your bird feeder is not going to help the chickadee actually breed in your yard. If they're in a healthy environment, they'll switch to invertebrates, but if they're in a healthy environment, they will rear their young exclusively on caterpillars. And they're not alone. 96% of the birds in North America rear their young on insects, and most of those insects are caterpillars. How do I know that? I had a grad student, Ashley Kennedy, who put out a call to bird photographers. Bird photographers really like to take pictures of birds. And they don't care. As long as they have an assignment, they'll go do it. And the assignment was take pictures of birds during the breeding season when they're bringing prey items back to the nest. And send those pictures to Ashley. She got thousands of pictures, and she identified the prey items in the beaks of as many birds in North America as she could. Then she could say what percentage is caterpillars and what percentage is other types of invertebrates. And in 16 out of the 20 common bird families that you had enough data for, caterpillars dominated the diet. Which means if we take caterpillars out of our environment, 16 out of the 20 common bird families, not species, but families, would be in big trouble. So caterpillars are special. Why? They're special for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons is that they're soft. So if you think of this guy as if he's a little sausage with a very thin wrapper, the thin wrapper is tight. It's exoskeleton. It's undigestible, and because it's a thin wrapper, you can stuff it down the throat of your offspring without fear of injuring you. And if you've ever watched the parent bird rear their young, they're rough. They're like a plunger. You just stuff it down in. Caterpillars are relatively large prey items. One medium-sized caterpillar is equal to the biomass of 200 aphids. Now, some of our smaller birds do chase aphids around, but you want to chase 200 aphids or get one? They are nutritious. They're very high in fat, very high in protein, low percentage of chitin, of exoskeleton compared to other insects, mostly beetles. Beetles are not like little sausages. They're like little tanks. So much of a beetle is undigestible. And many beetles have really sharp edges too. So you don't want to stuff them down. And then finally, it turns out caterpillars are the best source of carotenoids for birds during the breeding season. I mentioned carotenoids not because I love organic chemistry, but because I'm a vertebrate, and you're a vertebrate, and our poor chickadees are vertebrates. And we vertebrates cannot make carotenoids. Only plants make carotenoids, so we have to get our carotenoids from plants. And we have to get them from plants because carotenoids are essential components of vertebrate diets. So chickadees can't make their own carotenoids. They've got to get them from plants, but they're not eating plants. So they have to get them indirectly from plants by eating something that ate plants, and that something is caterpillars. If you look at the distribution of carotenoids across typical prey items that the chickadees bring back to the nest, or that lots of birds bring back to the nest, these first two bars here are types of caterpillars. They have far more carotenoids than other types of birds, other types of bird prey. Here are the adult caterpillars here, the moths and butterflies themselves. They have fewer carotenoids because they're not eating the green leaves. That's where the carotenoids are. And then here's the earthworm way down here. So the early bird gets the worm, and he doesn't get any carotenoids when he gets the worm. And it turns out there's a direct correlation between how often a prey item is brought back to the nest and its carotenoid content. Caterpillars are brought back more often than anything else, followed by orthopteroids, so things like crickets and grasshoppers and katydids. And then everybody else is down here at the end here. They don't have a lot of carotenoids, and they're not brought back to the nest very often. So let's just say that from those studies, and there are other studies that say the same thing, that caterpillars are not optional parts of most bird diets. They are essential parts of most bird diets. So the next question is, how many caterpillars does it take a chickadee to rear its young? You're not going to have any chickadees where you don't have enough caterpillars. So we have to know what enough caterpillars are. So how many caterpillars does it take to make a nest of chickadees? The answer is it takes a lot. And this is one of the first things I learned when it was through photography. I simply wanted to get a picture of a chickadee bringing food back to its nest. So I put a little chickadee box up in my yard. They occupied it right away. And I set my camera up and I sat there. And both the male and the female are foraging for caterpillars at the same time. So they can bring a caterpillar back to the nest once every 3 minutes. In one 27-minute period that I was standing there, they brought back 30 caterpillars. How did they do that? By bringing back more than one at a time. Sometimes a whole bunch. And they're doing it all day long, about 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. They're working very hard to feed those babies. The next question is, how many species of caterpillars do they bring back? And this turned out to be a very important question. I watched them for 3 hours once, and they brought back 17 different species of caterpillars that they had gotten from my yard. That's important because if I had 1 or 2 species of caterpillars in my yard, and it happened to be a bad year for those species, because caterpillars, their populations fluctuate, then there wouldn't be nearly enough caterpillars for the chickadees to reproduce. But if I have 17 species or 34 species or 134 species, and that gave me the idea, you better count the number of species of caterpillars in your yard. I am still doing that. And I'm up to, why is that important? I'm up to 1,337 caterpillar species that I have taken pictures of in my yard. They're there because we put the plants back. But that means that there's so many caterpillar species there that no matter who's fluctuating, there will always be enough caterpillars so the chickadees can successfully rear their young. That's an example of diversity creating stability in the food web, in the ecosystem. You've heard that diversity is good. This is a prime example of why it's good. Okay, a guy by the name of Richard Brewer, way back in 1961, he was studying chickadees, and I don't know what his major question was, but he counted the caterpillars the chickadees brought back to the nest for a bunch of nests. And he found out it was between 390 and 570 caterpillars to the nest every day. And they are in the nest for 16 days before they fledge, which means it takes between 6,000 and 9,000 caterpillars to get one clutch of chickadees to the point where they leave the nest. And after they leave the nest, after they fledge, the parents continue to feed them caterpillars another 21 days. But they're flying all around, so Richard was not able to count those. But you're really talking about tens of thousands of caterpillars required to get a bird that's 1/3 of an ounce. That's 4 pennies worth of bird to the point of independence. And guess what happens after the independence of their adults, of their parents? They keep eating caterpillars. Takes a lot of caterpillars. What if I wanted not just chickadees in my yard, but I wanted red-bellied woodpeckers too? They're 8 times heavier than a chickadee. How many caterpillars does that take? And I don't want just chickadees and red-bellied woodpeckers. I want scarlet tanagers and titmice and blue jays and blue birds. I want tree swallows and common yellow throats and indigo bunnings and towhees and yellow warblers and wood thrushes. I want wrens. I want cardinals. I want hummingbirds. Wait a minute. Hummingbirds don't eat insects. They eat honey. They eat nectar. Actually, if you look at what a hummingbird eats when it's reproducing, you don't make a baby out of sugar water. You make it out of protein. And 90% of a hummingbird's diet, particularly when they're reproducing, is insects and spiders. So, I want all those birds in my yard, and I don't want just one pair or in my neighborhood. I want a population. How many caterpillars does that take? Takes a lot. And this is a list of the North American bird families that rear their young on insects. And that's what I said earlier. It's 96% of them, and that includes hummingbirds. So we can generalize and say no caterpillars, no baby birds. Some exceptions there. I mean, finches and doves and crossbills actually make a little milk out of the seeds that they eat, and they can reproduce without insects. But most of the birds need insects, particularly caterpillars. So we have to put caterpillars into our landscape in order to have our chickadees. How do we do that? What types of landscapes are capable of supporting that number of caterpillars? Well, to answer that, we have to understand the relationship between caterpillars and the plants that we put in our landscapes. And I will remind you, I know I've told you this many times before, but plants don't want to be eaten. They want to capture the energy from the sun and use it for their own growth and reproduction. So they've loaded their leaves with nasty tasting chemicals, secondary metabolic compounds that make those leaves either bitter or downright toxic. And it's a really effective defense. It keeps most of the insects of the world from eating most of the plants of the world, which is why it's green in the summertime. It's not because there's no insects out there that want to eat those plants. It's because most of the insects that are out there cannot eat most of the plants. They are too well protected. It's a reason it's hard to get our kids to eat their vegetables. They inherently know they're toxic. But insects do eat plants. So how do they do that? How do they get around those chemical defenses? Well, they do it by specializing. 90% of the insects that eat plants can only eat particular plants. They can only eat the plants for which they have evolved very specialized adaptations that allow them to get past those defenses. Specialized enzymes that store and excrete and detoxify those compounds. Behavioral adaptations, life history adaptations that minimize the insect's exposure to those compounds. It takes a long period of interacting with those plant lineages for all those adaptations to fall into place. And when they do, the insect is locked into eating that particular plant lineage. It spent time developing mechanisms to get around this plant, but not that. So if you take that plant away, you've lost that insect. Let's look at the monarch butterfly, because we already know what the monarch is doing. We already know the monarch is a specialist on milkweeds. And most of us probably know that milkweeds are toxic plants. They're filled with cardiac glycosides. I mean, this summer, if you think back to what I'm saying and you don't believe me, you just start eating plants, don't eat a milkweed. If you eat enough milkweed, it will stop your heart. I used to say it'll give you a heart attack, but there was a physician in the audience. He said, no, it will not give you a heart attack. It will just stop your heart. Okay. So cardiac glycosides, the monarchs have enzymes that store and excrete and detoxify cardiac glycosides. That's good. But what about the sticky latex sap that gives milkweeds its name? When you cut open a vein on a milkweed leaf, all this white goo comes out. If you get it on your finger, you usually wipe it off right away. But if you let it sit there for a minute or so, when it's exposed to air, to oxygen, it gels. It turns into a chewing gum-like substance. And that is the defensive property of milkweed sap. If it gets on the mouth parts of a caterpillar, it glues their mouth shut. And then the caterpillar, not temporarily, permanently, and then the caterpillar starves to death. So it's a really effective defense. But the monarch eats milkweeds. How does it do that? How does it get around that sticky latex sap? This is something you can watch right in your yard when you plant your milkweeds. The monarch will walk onto the leaf, and I'll go typically to the end of the leaf, and it starts to eat. And if any latex sap at all starts to come out, it'll stop eating immediately, turn around, go back up the leaf maybe 2/3 of the way, and it starts to chew. And it chews and it chews till it has completely severed the midrib of the leaf. And what it's done is block the canals that shunt sap, milkweed sap, latex sap from this part of the leaf to this part of the leaf, which means this whole part of the leaf has no more latex sap. So it can turn around, go back down, and it can start to eat without any latex sap coming out at all. It's a very simple behavioral adaptation, but it's one that most other insects haven't figured out how to do. Specialization. And of course, that type of feeding, severing the midrib, will flag the leaf. And if you're a monarch hunter, it's a very convenient way to drive down the road and look at a patch of milkweed. If you see flagged leaves, you know that monarchs are there. So those are the upsides of specialization. The monarch can now eat a plant that is unavailable to anything else except other monarch specialists. So there are not very many of them. Most other insects cannot eat milkweed. That's the upside. The downside is that now that's all they can eat. We've got 2,137 native plant genera in North America, and the monarchs can only eat one, Asclepias. That is host plant specialization. And monarchs are not special. 90% of the insects out there have specialized relationships with particular plants, just like the monarch. So if you take milkweeds away, and we have, you lose the monarch. Now, there are a couple reasons monarchs are in trouble, but the big one is we have eliminated milkweeds largely from our roadsides in agricultural areas. They used to be lined with weeds, milkweed, New York ironweed, goldenrod, all the fall asters, evening primrose, all the things that we call weeds, sprayed them all with Roundup, and now we planted grass. So now if you're a farmer, you are high status because you have no weeds on the edge of your property. And we've done that through tens of thousands of miles of roadways. You know, drive through the Midwest. It's pristine, very nice, very pretty, but no more months. So we can actually put that back. That doesn't increase yield at all. That's something that has to be mowed. So you're putting more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. We can actually replant Midwest prairie plants, Eastern prairie plants along our roadsides and bring the monarch back. Now, we can use the knowledge of host plant specialization to purposely design a landscape that will produce enough caterpillars to support a bird. And I'm going to use the white-eyed vireo as an example because that is the nest that Cindy found in our yard several years ago now. But now the vireos knew that if I was going to take pictures of the caterpillars and bring it back to the nest, they had to build the nest very well. So they did. And I set my camera up and I sat there for, I don't know, 7 or 8 days taking pictures of what the vireos brought back. So here they're bringing back a blinded sphinx moth. That is a specialist on black cherry. A lot of black cherry at our house. So they're making blinded sphinx moths and the babies get to eat. This is the chestnut schizura. It's a specialist on viburnum. At our house, that's arrowwood viburnum, viburnum dentatum. And we have that, so the babies get to eat again. This is the drab prominent. It's a specialist on sycamore. We have sycamores not because I planted them, but because the wind blew in some seeds early on when we had some disturbed area. They germinated, and I didn't weed them. So now we have a lot of sycamore. Making drab prominence, the babies get to eat again. 8-spotted forester moth. That's a specialist on native grapes. We have those as well. Now people, you know, they climb our trees and people want to cut them down all the time. You can cut them down, but don't kill the roots. They'll grow up again, and it's really a very valuable native plant supporting a lot of caterpillars. This is the lunate azalea, another specialist on black cherry. This is the spicebush swallowtail, a specialist on spicebush and sassafras, related plants. That eye there is supposed to scare the bird into thinking it's a tree snake. It didn't work this time. This is the tufted bird dropping moth, another specialist on black cherry. So black cherry is emerging as a really important plant in terms of supporting this food web. But these guys are hungry. They need a lot more than that. So let's put some black walnut in the landscape. If we do that, we get the walnut sphinx, get the great-edged bomaloca, black blotch caesura, the bride. These are all caterpillars on black walnut. Native maples give us plagodes inchworms, the green striped maple worm, the maple bantam dagger moth, and of course many others. These are just examples. Native elms, American elm, give us the four-horned sphinx, the double-toothed prominent, the interrupted dagger moth. Remember, 90% of the insects, 90% of the caterpillars you're trying to create in your yard so that you can have breeding chickadees won't be there if you don't put the plants that support those caterpillars. So if you want the mustard sallow, you need witch hazel. If you want the hackberry emperor, you need berry, sulphus. If you want Caculio asteroides, you need native asters. The Arcigera flower moth and the brown-hooded owlet need goldenrod. The hog sphinx, the abbot sphinx, the Pandora sphinx and the abbot sphinx all need Virginia creeper. Redbud leaf roller needs redbud. The gray furcula needs native willows. Turbulent phosphilla needs greenbrier. And the orange tufted oneida, the spiny oak caterpillar, the two-spotted oak punky, the variable oak leaf caterpillar, the red-humped oak worm, the pink-striped oak worm, the hesitant dagger moth, the lesser oak dagger moth, the medium dagger moth, the greater oak dagger moth, the streaked dagger moth, the afflicted dagger moth, the white blotch heterocampa, the oblique heterocampa, the red line panapoda, the lapper, and literally hundreds more species require oaks. If you want to make a lot of caterpillars, you got to put oaks in your yard. As a matter of fact, nationwide, oaks support more than 950 species of caterpillars, much more than any other plant genus in this country. And, you know, you're making caterpillars, you're making other insects as well. But it's not just birds that eat. Lots of things depend on insects, like spiders. All spiders eat insects, or they eat other spiders that eat insects. And I know some of you don't like spiders, but look who does. It is the second most important component of bird diets. Other insects eat insects. We've got plenty of insect predators out there. Our amphibians eat insects. This is a spring peeper. Toads eat insects. Salamanders eat insects. Lizards eat insects. The skinks, bats eat insects. Our small rodents eat insects. Our bigger rodents eat insects. Things like skunks and possums and raccoons. Foxes, 25% of a fox's diet is insect. A quarter of their diet is insect. 23% of a black bear's diet is insect. So it doesn't matter how big you are, you still need insects. And even if you don't eat insects, you need insects. This is a sharp shinhawk. It is a bird predator, but the birds it's eating needed insects to become birds. This is a garter snake. It mostly eats those amphibians, the frogs and toads, and the salamanders. But they won't be there if you don't have the insects to make those frogs and toads and salamanders. The point is, a world without insects is a world without biological diversity, and a world without biological diversity is a world without humans. That's the most important take-home message today, and it's the one that's hardest to get across. Nobody believes that. They'll believe it when it happens, and that's today. As a matter of fact, Edward O. Wilson, way back in 1987, told us that insects are the little things that run the world. In a very nice paper that was pretty much totally ignored. But this is what happens if those insects disappear. We lose most of our flowering plants. They would disappear as well. And that would so drastically change energy flow through our terrestrial ecosystems that the food webs that support our vertebrate animals would collapse. Our amphibians, our reptiles, our birds, and our mammals would all disappear. The biosphere, the living portion of the earth, would rot because it would have lost insect decomposers that rapidly turn over nutrients. All we would have is bacteria and fungi. Humans wouldn't survive any of those drastic things. But we ignored Wilson's warnings, and that's why we're seeing headlines like this. We have this undeclared war on insects, and now we've got the insect apocalypse. What is it? New York Times. They say, what does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? They didn't read EO's paper. He told them exactly what it would mean if we lose our insects. The UN is predicting we're going to lose 1 million species to extinction in the next 20 years. Most of those will be insects. It's a prediction. Hasn't happened yet. And we have to make sure it doesn't happen because, again, those are the species that keep us alive on this planet. Birds. Birds that need insects. The State of the Birds report way back in 2016 said that 432 species of North American birds are now at risk of extinction. Not because there's only 4 or 5 left of each one, but because of the trajectory of their population decline. We now know that when things are declining rapidly, that's the signal of impending extinction. We do have 3 billion fewer breeding birds today than we had 45 years ago. Remember, a billion is 1,000 million. We have 3,000 million fewer breeding birds in North America. Already, they're already gone. So it is happening. We have to make sure it doesn't keep happening. I think our only viable option is to learn how to live in ecological harmony with the natural world that supports us. I mean, what's the alternative? Being unsustainable? That doesn't last very long. I think the only way to live in ecological harmony and live sustainably with the natural world is to restore the insects that support everything else. So let's consider the causes of insect decline. Dave Wagner, University of Connecticut, says it's death by 1,000 cuts because there's so many causes of insect declines. But these are the major ones: the misuse and overuse of pesticides, habitat loss. I'm driving in here just before I got here. There's a giant building being built. I don't know what it's going to be. Data center, no more insects there. That's habitat loss. Non-native ornamentals. So when we populate the world with plants that don't support those specialized interactions, we lose those interactions. And of course, many of those, 85 or 86% of the invasive woody plants we have in this country are escapees from our gardens. That's the invasive species problem that we have. Security lights kill insects. Roadside mortality kills insects. Climate change kills insects. It's good news to me because everything except climate change, maybe a little bit of roadside mortality, is something we as individuals can address. We don't have to wait for policy changes for the government to do anything constructive. We can look at what's happening to these things right at home. So that empowers us. That makes us very powerful. Let's talk about those invasive plants. If that's my way, Kelly, going okay? They destroy bird food. Why did they destroy it? Because our insects can't eat most of those plants. We have now 3,300 species of plants from other continents that have, quote, naturalized in our natural areas, making them not natural. This is a natural area. This is White Clay Creek State Park near my house, and that's what it looks like in the spring when plants from Asia leaf out before plants from North America. So you're looking at autumn olive and multiflora rose and oriole and bittersweet and bush honeysuckle and all those things. About a third of the vegetation in this natural area is not natural, and very little of it is supporting insects. We can measure. How do I know that? We measure it. We go into these places and we measure it. What happens when you allow non-native plants, call them invasive species, but whether they move or whether we plant them isn't important to me. What happens to the insect communities when we allow that to happen? And of course, I focused on caterpillars because they are so important. This is a very simple study I did with an undergrad a few years ago. We simply went into hedgerows in Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Delaware that were invaded by non-natives. There are a lot of automata here and the other stuff, and compared caterpillar populations in a standardized way to hedgerows that are not invaded. And the hardest part of this study was finding hedgerows that were not invaded. But we did find some. And what we found is it's a reduction in the number of species of caterpillars by 68%, a reduction in the abundance of those caterpillars in those invaded habitats by 91%, and a reduction in the biomass, the amount of energy those caterpillars put into that food web, by 96%. If caterpillars are bird food, and they are, we have just reduced bird food by 96%. It's not a surprise why the birds are disappearing. What if I said to you, introduced plants are reducing your bank account by 96%? I probably wouldn't have to go over and over again to convince you that's important. Well, insects are the currency in our ecological bank account. And it's our ecological bank account that keeps us alive on this planet. I know I will have to go over and over again, but it's important stuff. It really is. Point is, it's not the presence of introduced plants that is destroying local food webs. It is the absence of the native plants that support them. So if we increase the percentage of native plants in our managed landscapes, in our unmanaged landscapes, wherever we can, our roadsides, we can help turn this around. I was in a helicopter a while ago. That's a house not too far from me. It's designed exclusively for aesthetics. How do we put insects and chickadees and everything else back into a landscape like that? Why am I talking about landscapes like that? Because most of the country is privately owned. 135 million acres of residential landscapes and other types of private land ownership. 85.6% of the land east of the Mississippi is privately owned. What we do on our private properties is going to mean we either have success in conservation or we don't. In the past, when we decorated our residential landscapes, we did it for one reason, to make them pretty, according to the regional standard. Everything was about aesthetics. Was it a pretty plant? We went all over the world to find the prettiest plants. Maybe it could be a screen or an anchor or focal point. None of it was looking at the ecological value of the plants we put into our yards. And when you landscape like that, you make beautiful landscapes, but they are ecologically dead. That is ecological destruction. It's art using plants, which is okay unless you do it all over the earth. Then it's not okay. Remember the four things that every landscape has to accomplish if we're going to reach that ecological harmony we talked about. Every landscape has to support the food web. They've got to support the caterpillars and the chickadees and everything else that is out there. Every landscape has to sequester carbon, remove carbon from the atmosphere, lock it up in plant tissues, and then pump the extra carbon into the soil on that landscape. The soil is the big carbon storage bin for carbon on your landscape. So even if you don't have a whole lot of plants, if you get a lot of carbon into your soil, you are helping climate change. Every landscape has to manage the watershed in which it lies. Every landscape. Nobody gets a buy on that. And every landscape has to support pollinators. Why do we have to support pollinators? It's not because they pollinate our crops. You hear they pollinate a third of our crops. It's about a 12th of our crops. And I hear people say, well, I don't live next to a farm, so I don't need any pollinators. Forget the crop argument. We need pollinators everywhere we need plants because they're pollinating 90% of those plants, 80% of all plants and 90% of all flowering. That's what every landscape has to do. Every landscape, even yours, even our corporate landscapes, even George Mason landscapes. We all have to do that. So when we pick our ornamental plants based on the ecological function that they're doing, as well as their aesthetic value, then landscaping equals ecological restoration. This was my mother-in-law's house, and it was built on farmland when they moved in. And that's what happened when they moved out. It doesn't take that long to put the landscape back. And by the way, they didn't plant most of those plants. All they did was manage the invasive species. So which plants should we be sure to have in our landscapes? Well, I always talk about keystone plants because they're the ones making the most caterpillars. Just 14% of our native plants are making 90% of the caterpillar food that drives those food webs. They are the keystone plants, the ones that our food webs cannot survive without. Remember what a keystone is? It's the stone in the middle of the Roman arch. And if you put that stone out of the arch collapses. Well, if you take keystone plants out of your local food web, the food web collapses because they're making most of the food. Ginkgo is not a keystone plant. Why? It doesn't support any caterpillars. It's a very nice ornamental. I've heard the argument, hey, they were in North America 7 million years ago, so they're native. We don't care whether they're native or not. We care what they're doing. Ginkgos aren't doing anything. They're pretty. They're pretty. In terms of the food web, they're not supporting any caterpillars at all. So there you go. Those oaks, 950 species of caterpillars, not individuals, but species nationwide. Native prunus, black cherry and pin cherry, American plum, 456 species of caterpillars. They're number 2, tied with willows in terms of the mid-Atlantic states. These are really valuable plants. Zelkova, no caterpillar, zero caterpillar. We brought it in because it looked like the American elms that we lost to Dutch elm disease. It was, again, all about looks and aesthetics. It's not doing what we needed to do. Pieris japonica used to be the most abundant foundation plant in North America. I'm not sure if it is anymore. You do have native Pieris, and there are 2 species. It's not a high-producing plant, but 2 species will use Pieris. Blueberries, could be a blueberry next to your foundation planting. 294 species use that. Native viburnums, 118 species use that. English ivy, nothing. Crepe myrtle, nothing. If you want to know what the most important plants are in terms of supporting that food web in your county, go to Native Plant Finder and the National Wildlife Federation website and put in your zip code, and the ranked list of the most important plants in your county, both woody and herbaceous plant general, will pop up. So try to think of the plants in your yard.
You. What is wrong with you?
Because they could be. You get to decide how well you're going to feed the birds. So they're bird feeders there. You could feed the birds really well or not so well. You could put food in your bird feeders. They don't eat the feeders. They eat the food that's in the feeder. Or not. This is the ginkgo back there. It's a big tree, but no food on the ginkgo. And we are not fooling our birds when we fail to plant those keystone plants. Here's a little bit of data from my former PhD student, Desiree Narango, who looked at chickadees within the beltway of the DC here. She studied them here. Was anybody a part of that study? It was people like you. She just knocked on their door and they said yes. So this red line, if you can see it, is the foraging area where 90% of the foraging of a pair of chickadees happen. The star is where the nest was, and the blue sections here are where those chickadees got 90% of the food for their babies. So let's look at what those plants are. They're all the native trees in the area. Chickadees forage on trees. They forage on woody plants. So black cherry, basswood, sweet gum, American elm is the big one, 2 species of oaks. But the chickadees had the option of looking at other trees in that neighborhood. And that's what was in the neighborhood. There's our friend the ginkgo, black poplar, crepe myrtles, Leyland cypress, Japanese, they were all non-native plants. And it's very easy to picture a neighborhood like that where those are the dominant trees. And you might say, how do chickadees know there's no food in crepe myrtles? They didn't read about it. Because they do go in there once and they look around. It's like going to ShopRite when the shelves are bare. You don't go back. It's a waste of your time. Foraging time is really, really, it's a valuable resource. They go to the trees where they're getting the most food. It's feedback loop. She also looked at the migrating birds that stopped in her plots, her neighborhoods on their migration. Now these guys, I think it's 51 species. These guys had just flown all night long and they come down at dawn and people say they're resting. Yeah, they're resting, but what they're doing is refueling. It's the gas station. They're coming down where they can get a lot of food to eat. That food is caterpillars. And if they come down in the land of ginkgo, they are out of luck. And if they're really out of gas, they don't have the energy to go someplace else. I don't know if anybody's ever found a migrant in a parking lot of a big mall. It's just sitting there shivering. It's done. It doesn't have the energy to go to a place and find food. Migrants don't know that we've destroyed everything. They go right where they always did and hope that it's there, which means the trees you put in your yard, even if it's not a big enough place to support reproduction of birds, it can support migrants in a very valuable way. All right, it is now fall. We're going back to our chickadee. Chickadee is successfully bred, but now it's got to get through the winter. These guys are not migrants. They spend the winter here. And remember, they have just switched from invertebrates to seeds for 50% of their diet. Where are they going to get those seeds? Well, in the old days, I'm talking about the very old days, there was actually, most of the East actually looked like savannas. We had big trees, but we had a lot of spaces between them. The huge Pleistocene mammals kept it very open. And prairie plants came all the way to the Atlantic, and they made a lot of seeds. And that supported the seed eaters during the wintertime. And I have heard ornithologists say, you don't have to feed the birds. There's plenty of seed out there. I don't know where they live, but in a typical neighborhood, there's not only not plenty of seed, there's almost no seeds. So these types of meadow situations have become very rare in an awful lot of human-dominated landscapes. But we do plant plants that make seeds, and the chickadees will use them if we don't deadhead them, cut them off because, oh, they're not pretty anymore. They're still functional. You want to deadhead something, do it in March when the seeds are all gone. So things like black-eyed Susan, New York ironweed, pasture thistle. Pasture thistle, it's not invasive. It's a native thistle, very important plant. Joe Pye weed, evening primrose. Here's a goldfinch eating the seeds of evening primrose. Those things all support our overwintering birds and many others. But of course, we do put up bird feeders, and the chickadees are happy that we do. If you've ever watched a chickadee, if you watch a house finch, it'll go to your feeder, sit there and eat seed after seed. Just sit there. Not the chickadee. It's looking around. It will take a seed, and then it's not going to eat it there. It's going to hide it. It's going to store it for future use because it doesn't know you're going to have your feeder up all winter long. So we're going to hide it. It's got to look around. There it goes. This is a good place. You've got all these flappy bark here. Maybe I can stick it in there. But I like this hole better. I'm going to store my seed in there. Yes. But Mr. Blue Jay was watching. Blue jays, they're little rascals there. I think there's a seed in here. Yes, there is a seed in here. So the chickadee has to do it again. And they do it. They all fall along. They're at your seed, your bird feeder, storing seeds wherever they can. The real question is, how do they remember where those seeds are? The other day, I was looking for my cell phone. It was in my hand. I was talking on it, but I don't know where it was. Where was it? The chickadees grow their brains. They grow their hippocampus. Hippocampus is the memory of their brain. And in the fall, it increases inside, I think, by a third, something like that. And then in the spring, after they found all their seeds, they remember where they hid them, it shrinks again. Why don't they stay smart all the time? Because brains are really expensive. It takes a lot of energy to maintain a brain. So they only get smart when they need to be smart. The point is, you can make your landscape varied enough, unsterile enough, so that you have nooks and crannies for the birds. It's not just chickadees, it's titmice and other birds that store their seeds all winter long, but you have to give them a place to do that. Don't worry about Mr. Blue Jay. There's plenty of acorns out there. When you plant your oak, and that's what blue jays rely on during the winter time, they have a mutualistic relationship with oaks. They transport oak acorns a good distance from the tree, and of course the oaks make the acorns for the jay. They both evolved in what is now the Arctic about 53 million years ago, something a long time ago, and they got to know each other right away. The big thing that jays do for oaks is allow them to move. They allow them to disperse faster than any other deciduous tree in the world. And this is how that works. They don't cache acorns. So in other words, they're not putting a whole bunch in one place like squirrels and other things do. They can carry more than one at a time, but they bury them singly. So they'll pick one up. They'll fly up to a mile or a mile and a half from the parent tree and then tap it below the surface of the soil. That is much farther than other seed dispersers go. So there they are, they're tapping it below the surface of the soil. And then in the wintertime, they're going to go back and get that acorn. Particularly during a mast year, when there's a lot of acorns around, a single jay can bury 4,500 acorns. That's a lot of acorns. But they only remember where 1 out of 4 is, which means a single jay has planted 3,060 oak trees and a good distance from the parent tree. So that's how oaks are moving so far. Okay, now it's wintertime. It's the dead of winter. How is the chickadee going to make it through the winter? This is actually a very valuable time for you to have bird feeders up because they really do need in an awful lot of places. But remember, only 50% of their diet is seed, so they still have to find insects somewhere. And if you look at your big trees, particularly your oaks, you're going to see little birds flitting around there, chickadees and titmice and yellow crown or golden crown kinglets. What are they doing up there? There's no more acorns. There's no insects. I took this picture a couple of winters ago, the golden crown kinglet. This is the kinglet paradox. They should have migrated. These guys, it's not 50% of their diet is seeds. 100% of their diet is insects. How are they making it through the wintertime? Well, Heinrich does not like paradoxes. So he actually looked in the crops of golden crown kinglets in Maine in January, and he found they were full of caterpillars. They are eating caterpillars in Maine in January that they're getting from the trees. The caterpillars are in the trees. We just didn't know it because they look like sticks. They look a lot like sticks, and they just sit there all winter long. When it gets cold, they have proteins in their cells that keep the cell from freezing. So the caterpillar shrinks a little bit, and then it expands when it gets warm. But there are a lot of caterpillars up in the trees. So there's no more kinglet paradox. We know why they're there. Which means we need to plant the trees that make a lot of caterpillars. And again, oaks lead the way in terms of having caterpillars both in the summertime and the wintertime. Other sources of food for our chickadee and other birds would be what's in our meadows. Of course, these seeds, these are the seeds from our native grasses that are allowing the sparrows that don't go to our feeders. They're getting seeds on the ground, the sparrows and the juncos, and it's from the native grasses. So it's another reason you don't mow your meadow in the fall if you've just removed all that forage. But this is a goldenrod gall. And if you have goldenrod, you're going to have goldenrod galls. And if you cut it open, there's a fly larva in there. We're not going to call it a maggot. We're going to call it a larva. And it's from this fly, the goldenrod gall fly. But chickadees know they're there. And it's a very important source of food. When you go visit grandma over Christmas break and you don't fill your feeder for a week, what are the chickadees going to do? Well, they're going to hammer away at these things. In the spring, look at all your goldenrod gulls. Most of them have been eaten out by chickadees and also by downy woodpeckers. How about those bagworms? You don't like bagworms, but look who does. Now, the bagworms are really well protected. It is hard to get in there, but a chickadee will hang upside down there for a half an hour pecking away. If they manage to get in, the larva that is in there is actually, it's complicated. It's an adult bagworm female that looks just like a larva. It doesn't ever actually mature, but it's almost as big as the chickadee. It's a great meal to get through a very cold time. So the question is, can landscapes like this support these interactions? And we know that they can't. We now have an area of lawn in this country, 44 million acres in size. That's an area bigger than New England, dedicated to an ecological deadscape, and we still worship it. We have Lawn of the Week award. Who can have the deadest landscape? It's a lost opportunity. It's a lost opportunity. Ray Dennis, he's a restoration guy in England, not too long ago said, land ownership is more than a privilege, it is a responsibility. And it truly is. You know, the biosphere, the living portion of the earth, if that was an egg with an eggshell, it's thinner than the eggshell. It's just a tiny, tiny portion of the earth that supports life. And as far as we know, it supports all the life in the universe. And the way we landscape that life is going to determine whether it continues or not. It is an awesome responsibility. I drive past this church in Mississippi, and it strikes me that, you know, on Sundays, everybody's in there worshiping God's creations, and the rest of the week, they're killing them. We're not thinking. We're not thinking. So it doesn't mean you have to save biodiversity for a living, but you can save it where you live, and you can do that by the way you landscape. And if you do, it empowers you. A lot of people are upset about the state of the planet, but, you know, justifiably, they feel powerless. What can one person do? Well, one person can shrink the lawn. One person can modify the lights, put a yellow bulb in your outdoor light instead of a white bulb. That helps insect decline. One person can not hire a mosquito fogger, which kills all the insects, including the monarch. One person can put in a pollinator garden. One person can use keystone plants. One person can do a whole bunch to support the chickadee and everybody else in your yard. And it makes the problem manageable for one person. If you think about the entire planet, you get depressed. But you can influence what's happening where you live. If you own property, it's obvious that's where you start. If you don't own property, volunteer, help somebody who does, help them manage that landscape in a way that will support those chickadees. So if we plant for chickadees, we really can save many of our fellow earthlings, and we can do it right at home. Thanks very much.
Well, that was terrific. Thank you so much, Doug. So right now, I know that you can purchase Doug Tallamy's books at the Prince William Wildflower Society table, which is just out here. So for the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to have a networking break. So you have an opportunity to do that. Doug will be outside and to chat, sign books, etc. And please join me in thanking Doug again for such a wonderful, wonderful talk. All right, we're not going to be doing Q&A. Okay, thank you.
New book coming out in April 9th, something like that. It's called How Can I Help? And it is, you know, every day, and I mean every day, I get emails from people saying, what about this? What about this? How do I do this? And I decided I'm answering those, but I put it all together in a book. So it's the answers to 499 questions that you people have asked me. The important thing is it doesn't just go over what's in the other books. These are questions from people like you who've already heard the talks and you've read the books, but you still have really good questions. So I'm hoping it addresses things that we haven't talked about yet.
All right, thank you, everyone.